So I just say that so you know that anything I talk about along those lines and planning and so forth is just purely objective. I'm not on here to try to gain any clients or anything like that. Want to begin with a quote that you had on your invitation, I think I saw, but one of my favorite quotes comes from Yogi Berra, the great philosopher, who once said, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else. And I love this quote, number one, because it's just funny, I think, as a lot of things Yogi said, but also I think it's pretty applicable to a lot of things in life, particularly when we're talking about planning. Because really, if we don't have a roadmap, if we don't have some idea, some very clear objective about where we want to go, then, you could sort of end up any place, you might say. So it's a really good backdrop to what I want to talk with you about today. Topics that I'm going to cover with you just broadly. Number one, top concerns among older adults. I'm going to share the results of a survey that was done several years ago that I think many of you will share some of these concerns. And I want to begin there because that's kind of the foundation of what we want to plan really against is these concerns. I want to talk about some of the retirement living options. As I said earlier, try to break down some of the complexities around that so that you can maybe be more prepared to do comparisons appropriately. We'll talk about life plan communities, what makes that unique from some of the other options that are out there. Life plan communities, or as they're sometimes called, continuing care retirement communities. Again, there's a lot of terminology out there. And we'll talk about some of the key parts of the decision process as you're doing your research. What are some of the things you need to really think about as you go through and evaluate what's best for you in terms of researching retirement communities? So one of the questions I'd like to start with is asking, what does peace of mind mean for you? If you were to really think about that, if you were to close your eyes and think about what peace of mind at this stage of your life really represents, that's really a good starting point for planning when you think about it. Because when we think, we really have to ask, what's the point of planning? Why do we even have plans and retirement plans and so forth? And ultimately, it's for peace of mind. And let me say one thing. If I use the word retirement planning, I'm not really talking about it in the traditional sense. Some people think of that as planning for retirement. And I'm sure many of you, if not all of you on this call, are already retired and maybe have been for a number of years. But retirement planning continues throughout retirement. It takes a little different shape than it did in the pre-retirement years. But that's what I'll talk with you a little bit about as we go through this today. But what is the goal? The goal ultimately with any type of plan is peace of mind. And so as you think about what that means for you and what's most important to you, I want to share the results of a survey that was done several years ago by Merrill Lynch, along with a group called AgeWave. And I suspect if they did this again, the results would be very similar. But they asked people, in retirement, what are your biggest concerns about living a long life? And why a long life? Well, we know that people are living longer today than certainly generations ago. And we know that we need to plan for a long life. We want our money to last, assuming that we will live a long life. But there are some concerns that come along with that. And I think you all would share many of these. The top answer, serious health problems. No big surprise there. The second biggest concern was not being a burden on my family, followed by things like, even being lonely and not having a purpose, as you can see here. Really, these don't even have that much to do with money. But again, if you think about what peace of mind really represents, I would suspect that for many of you, it's really the opposite of what you see right here. In other words, the extent to which you can minimize the potential for these concerns in your life, then that's going to help increase your peace of mind. So that really is where we come back to planning. How do we plan for these things? Well, let's talk a little bit about what a retirement plan is. Now, I want to talk with you about thinking more broadly. If we widen the scope, maybe holistic planning is a better phrase to use. But You know, when I mention the word retirement plan to somebody, usually the first thing they're going to think about is finances, asset allocation, you know, how your money's invested, your cash flow, your income plan, tax efficient planning, all these different things. This is not an investment seminar, so I'm not here to talk. Those are conversations for you to have with your own financial professionals. But finances certainly is an important part of a retirement plan. But I would argue that there are other equally important pieces that really, number one, are all sort of interconnected, and that all kind of come back to finances in the end in some way. So the next one is what I would call preventative health, or maybe wellness. You could even call this lifestyle, perhaps. But what does that have to do with a retirement plan, you may ask? Well, what I'm really getting at here with this one is, you know, on that previous slide that I showed you, two of the concerns were being lonely or not having a purpose. These are those social wellness concerns, but there are so many other aspects to wellness. So it's no longer, you know, when we think of wellness, we may first think of physical, right? You know, whether it's exercise, diet, these kind of things, obviously very important. But then you have the social wellness components that I alluded to a moment ago. We also have intellectual wellness. We have vocational wellness. We have spiritual wellness and emotional wellness. How well you're optimizing those different areas of wellness in your life really is going to determine not only your overall well-being today, your health and well-being, but in theory, it's going to help minimize the chance of health concerns later on. And remember, the number one answer on that previous slide was serious health concerns. So preventative health, this piece, your lifestyle, and all of these things, these wellness components are important, because not only will it minimize potentially that concern or the chance of that concern, but also the corresponding cost of that. And so there is why I said it comes back to finances. But then, of course, we have the next category, which is what I would call your post-health event plan. So, you know, throughout retirement, sometimes our health can decline. You know, for some people, maybe their health declines throughout their retirement years, maybe gradually. For others, perhaps they, you know, have a healthy life right up until the very end. And then still for others, maybe health can change very suddenly and unexpectedly. We've all seen these situations happen, perhaps with friends or others that we know and other family members. And that can lead to a very difficult situation where it can kind of turn everything upside down for that family member or that individual, and also for their family members. So the question then is, what's the plan if something like that happened, particularly if it happens suddenly? What's your post-health event plan, as I call it? Where would you be? What services would you want to have available if something like that happened? Who would you want involved? All of these kind of things are so important, and you can't plan for every single thing. I realize that. We don't know what's going to happen one day, the next, much less, you know, 5, 10, 15 years or more from now. But understanding the options, thinking through the options and what you would want in those certain situations, and not being in denial that those things can certainly happen, that can help a lot. And educating yourselves, as you're doing today, is the first step. So I commend you all for doing that, because too many people, too many families don't do that. Lastly, the last category is family. The second biggest concern on that slide I showed you a moment ago was being a burden on family. 60% of people have that concern. And so clearly this is an important part. And family too, all of these things, again, are kind of interconnected in so many ways, but they all come back to finances. And in this case, could even come back to the finances of your family, particularly if they ever ended up in a situation where they were having to, you know, be in a caregiver role or take time away from their own careers, or, you know, not being able to contribute as much to their own retirement accounts or whatever it may be. So these are all very important parts that all work together, and we have to think about all of that. But here's one other thing I would say, which is that where you live throughout your retirement years is a very important part of your overall retirement plan. Housing is a very important part of your plan. Every one of these categories would be impacted in some way by where you live. So as we think about that, what are the choices? Well, of course, many of you on this call, maybe you're still in your own home. Maybe it's the same home you've lived in for years and years, maybe decades. Some of you, maybe you've downsized or you're already in some other type of a retirement community. But for those of you that are on the call, I should say since you're on the call, I'm guessing that you've either wondered or began to question whether your current, wherever you currently are living is the healthiest or the happiest, the best long-term option for you. Could be many reasons why you're wondering about that. The other option, of course, is to live in a retirement community. There's a lot of maybe subcategories under this, and we'll look at that in a moment. But these are really the two, let's just say the overarching choices. There may be categories under each of these, but either stay in your own home or live in some sort of a retirement community setting. Now, one time I was presenting, this has probably been a couple of years now, but this is when I was doing a live presentation someplace, and the guy raised his hand. He told me I forgot one. And when I said, "What's that?" he said, "Move in with the kids." And so that is, of course, an option. And some people do that because they want to, some maybe because they need to, whatever the situation may be. But I think for most people, these are the two main options. So let's talk about comparing the retirement living options for a moment. If you are thinking about what are some of the other things that are out there, the other alternatives, well, as I said at the beginning of the call, there's a lot of confusion about the different types of options that are available. And so I want to share this chart as a starting point, because if you really can categorize your options on the front end, it can help you to do your research, I think, more effectively. So let's talk first. If you look at this sort of blue double-sided arrow at the bottom, it says level of care requirement. And so over here on the far left, it says no help needed. So in other words, that represents those who are living totally, or let's just say mostly independently. They don't need help or care on a day-to-day basis. Then, of course, on the other side, we have the complete opposite. This would be what I might call completely dependent or 24-hour type of care. So those are the two extremes. And then you have different sort of categories or phases between those two. So if you look at that and then look at these different options, so much terminology, but let's just call this active adult. These are just planned 55 and older neighborhoods. You probably have a lot of those out in your part of the country in Arizona. It's just 55 and older planned developments. Usually you'll own the home, pay homeowners dues potentially, or most likely. But in many ways, really, you're still living in your own home. It's just in a 55 and older active adult type of neighborhood, but there's really no care. You notice that there's nothing on this end of the chart when we think about the levels of care. So conceivably, you would have to make all those decisions about whether to move, whether you need to move, bring care in the home, or what have you. Then we get to rental retirement. Rental retirement goes out a little further on the spectrum, as you can see. It generally will cover some level of assisted living, maybe memory care, but usually doesn't cover that higher, the more advanced type of care that you may need. Now, this can be different from one community to another. This is just really an overview. But a lot of times rental retirement communities will stop short of providing those higher levels of care. So you need to really understand what they offer and what they don't. Then we get into these, what I just call freestanding or standalone care providers. So assisted living, skilled nursing, standing alone, in other words, they're not part of a broader community. They don't have any residents that are living independently. All their residents are receiving some level of care. So really not even retirement communities, they're really more care type facilities. Although these two can be confused a lot of times. Sometimes a rental retirement community can begin to look a little bit like assisted living as residents age. And then lastly, we have what's called a life plan community or continuing care retirement community. This is what Royal Oaks and certainly the new Inspirata Pointe development or neighborhood would fall under this category. And you'll notice that with this, with life plan communities, it covers the whole spectrum. So it's really some combination of everything I've just shown you previously, all in one place. So no matter whether you're independent or need 24-hour care or something in between, it's available there in one location. So these are the different sort of categories. And you have to really think about not just what you want today or would want to have available today, but also down the road if something were to change. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about these two, because this is where I see the most questions. You know, comparing retirement communities, rental retirement, to life plan communities, which typically have an entry fee. Let's talk a little bit about each of those separately. First, I want to talk with you about rental retirement communities, because maybe you've looked at some of those. Well, here's some characteristics of rental retirement communities. First of all, there's no entry fee, maybe a community fee of a few $1,000s or something, but there's not a true quote unquote entry fee. And that's why they're called rental retirement communities. All other things being equal, and this is an important thing that I try to emphasize to people, that caveat, all other things being equal, the monthly rate at a rental retirement community would have to be higher than it would be at an entry fee community, which I'll talk about next. All other things equal. Now, all other things are not always equal, but if they're not receiving anything on the front end in the way of an entry fee, then they're going to have to collect that really as they go. So that's why I say, you know, the money's got to come from somewhere. So a rental community over time, over lifetime, can actually be just as expensive, if not more than an entry fee community. Just depends on how long you're there, what type of care you may ultimately need, whether they even can provide that care or not. A lot of variables go into that. But if, again, I just always use that, you know, everything else being equal, that's generally the way it would work. The available levels of care will vary, as I showed you a moment ago. They may not have those higher levels of care on site. They may not offer that at all. And so sometimes you may have to move again or something like that, just depending on your condition. So that's a consideration. And then financial assistance is typically not going to be available, meaning if you're in a rental retirement community and you exhaust your assets, let's say you outlive, you know, your assets or what have you, or exhaust your assets paying for care, whatever it is, then you'll probably have to leave and go somewhere, Medicaid type situation or something like that. So these are just some characteristics of a rental retirement community. Mainly, you just don't have that entry fee, but you pay on a month-to-month basis. Maybe it's an annual lease or something like that. Now let's talk about life plan communities. So this is the category that Royal Oaks would fall in, and there's obviously some differences here. So some of the characteristics of a life plan community is, number one, residents are contractually provided not only long-term residential services and housing, but also care, really for life. So there's a contract there that, and the contract language can vary from one community to another, from one state to another, certainly depending on the regulations in that state. But generally speaking, it's a contract that really says residents move in while they're independent and have lifetime access, priority access via this contract to all of those services that are available within that community. So they have really a plan in the sense that if something changed, everything they need is there within that community. So that kind of leads to the second point, which is that typically all levels of care, and I say typically a lot because there's always can be nuances, but typically all levels of care, as I showed you on that chart a moment ago, are provided within a life plan community or a CCRC. Usually an entry fee in exchange. So part of that contract, that sort of access to lifetime care, comes from that entry fee. And I'll talk more with you in a moment about entry fees and the purpose of that. Sometimes the cost of care will be discounted in a life plan community. So if you do need that care that they offer, you may not have to pay the full market cost of that care. A lot of times the entry fee and even some portion of the monthly fee can be deducted. Okay, so that's something that's unique to life plan communities. Some portion of that can be deducted as a medical expense deduction, even while you're not receiving services, even while you're living independently. So I'll touch on that as well. And then, I talked about how with rental retirement communities, they don't provide financial assistance. Most life plan communities, particularly not-for-profits, do provide that financial assistance, that endowment, whereby if a resident were to exhaust their assets, they don't have to leave the community. It doesn't happen that often, but when it does, residents like knowing that they at least have that sort of backstop in place. And finally, residents of a life plan community need to be financially and medically approved. So there is kind of an underwriting type process on the front end where they're going to look at your finances. Why? Well, as I said a moment ago, they provide that financial assistance, sometimes even discount the cost of care. Well, those kind of things, if everybody that moved in ran out of money after a year, it's hard to maintain that model, and it's hard to maintain that contractual commitment to their residents. So they have to do a bit of a financial underwriting on the front end. And then also they look at your health. Because the same thing, if everybody that moved in needed care immediately, then it's hard to make that model work financially. So they need residents. They need to know residents are living independently for at least a number of years before they are at risk of needing those services. So it doesn't mean they won't need them sooner, but under average circumstances, that's kind of the thing they look at. So a lot of different things here that distinguish a life plan community or a CCRC from other types of retirement communities. So let me talk with you for a moment about the evolution of the entry fee model, because some people ask, well, what's the purpose of the entry fee? And I've touched on that a little bit in terms of the trade-offs, whether you're getting it on the front or kind of collecting as you go. But one of the things I think is helpful to know is that the entry fee model really evolved out of a model that started well over 100 years ago. It was really back, with church-based organizations, fraternal type groups and so forth that many times back then were looking after widows. And the way it worked was that person would assign all of their assets over to the church or whatever the organization was. They would, really just assign everything to that organization. And then the organization in turn would provide housing and health care for that person for life. And sometimes that person didn't have enough in assets to cover the lifetime cost. And that's where the charitable component came in. But that's the way that worked. But what happened is that over time, particularly with the Industrial Revolution and people's levels of wealth grew, no longer were they very keen on turning over all their assets to this organization or this community. So that's where the industry started to look at it differently. And they said, well, let's be a little more actuarial about this. And they started sort of projecting out how, the lifetime cost of their whole resident population and how much they would have to pay down the road and all these kind of things. And they said, okay, here's what we're going to do. Instead of giving us all of your assets, we need this much to kind of make it work. And that's where entry fees came from. And so you have your entry fees combined with monthly fees, but then the charitable component is now on the back end instead of the front end. So if you exhaust your assets, that's where that charitable piece comes in. But eventually people said, well, what if we pay all this money and then we don't, what if we move out? Or what if we pass away? Do our kids or grandkids get it? And that's when, in response to that, refundable entry fees were then, you started to see those come out as an option. So that's 110 years or so of history in, 3 or 4 minutes. But that's just kind of how I think it helps to understand the evolution of that entry fee model. And so now when we talk about that last piece, the refundable entry fees, this is kind of how it works. So I'm going to show you a few examples. Many retirement communities, and I think Royal Oaks probably would fall in this category, they provide different options. So one option may look like this. You pay your entry fee when you move in, whatever it is. Okay, it's going to be based on the size of the residence and perhaps some other things, but whatever that entry fee is. And if you were to move out, or maybe in the event of death, again, you need to understand the contract, but whatever it is, over those first few years, some refund will be available on a declining basis. So this one stretches out through 3 years. Some may stretch to 4 or 5. Some may only be 2 years. But the point is, you would get some refund of that entry fee back on a declining basis in those early years. And then there's no refund available beyond that. But some communities may also offer options like this, where maybe you pay, I don't know, 30% more than the first option, but you would never get back less than 50% of that entry fee. This is just an example. All this is just conceptual, but that would be an option. And another one may look like this, where you pay yet even more, but your refund never goes below 90% of that entry fee. So you can see these trade-offs, and again, sometimes you have options. But this is important to know, because if you're comparing two different communities and one has an entry fee that's a lot higher than the other, there could be other reasons for that, but this could be one of them. You know, you have to think about the refundable aspects of that. So, as I said, you want to know the contract, understand the stipulations around this, but conceptually, this is how that works. Now let's talk about the monthly cost. What happens on a month-to-month basis? Well, I want to look at a few things here. The first three I'm going to look at are entry fee models. And the last one will be that rental retirement community that I talked with you about earlier. So when we talk about the entry fee communities, you pay your entry fee. And then the first one I'm going to show you works kind of like this. And I think this is what Royal Oaks offers, or maybe one of the things that they offer as an option. And it works kind of like this. No matter where you're living within that community, whether you're living independently or whether you need assisted living or nursing care, you're going to keep paying the same monthly cost. That doesn't mean there can't be inflationary increases along the way. That doesn't mean there can't be ancillary charges for certain things. That's true of any retirement community. But that base monthly rate that you pay is not going to change if you need care later on. So for people that like predictability, for people who like to know really what their out-of-pocket monthly cost is going to be, no matter how much care they need or how long they need it, then this can be a good option. So this is called life care, or sometimes called a Type A contract. Other contracts offered by entry fee communities may look like this. You pay your entry fee, and then what happens is you begin paying your monthly fee. Now, as I said earlier, all other things being equal, if the retirement community was identical in every other way, you would pay less while living independently. Maybe a lower entry fee, maybe a lower monthly fee, maybe both. But in some way, you would pay less while living independently, with the trade-off being that when you need care, you pay the full cost of that. And we know it can be pretty expensive, depending on the level of care that you need and how long you need it. So with this option, you really have unlimited exposure in terms of the cost. But people who like this option say, well, I realize I'll pay it if I need it, but I'm only going to pay it when I need it. Or maybe they have long-term care insurance or something like that. So you can see the trade-offs here. And then there are some that offer kind of a blend of those two. And again, I know that Chuck and the team at Royal Oaks can talk with you more about what they offer. But I'm guessing they have a couple of these options to choose from, like this perhaps. But this one would be a blend of those first two. And I won't go into a lot of details, but there can be some hybrid sort of options where you pay more if you need care, but not the full market rate. So you pay like a discounted rate for the cost of health care services or long-term care. So that's kind of like the Goldilocks one, where it's kind of right in the middle. Lastly, with a rental retirement community, you would not have the entry fee up front, but you would pay more even while living independently. Again, if everything else was the same, you would pay more while living independently, and then you would still pay the full cost of care for these other levels. That's even assuming that these levels are available. Remember, sometimes with rental communities, this last one may not even be offered within that community. So you may have to move again, either temporarily or permanently. And there's cost to that, emotional cost and certainly monetary cost that you have to consider. So that's kind of a breakdown of the different sort of, payment structures or residency contract models that are offered across all the senior living options. I mentioned earlier that with a life plan community, often a deduction is available. Some of you may have heard of this, and I get asked about this a lot during Q&A, so I just thought I'd put it in the presentation. But I won't go over all of this right now, but you can see it on the screen here. But one of the things I would mention is that, as you all know, the tax code changed back in 2016, and it increased the standard deduction by quite a bit, which means more people are now taking a standard deduction than itemizing their deductions. The reason I mention that is because in order to take this medical expense tax deduction, which can be pretty sizable, 20, 30, 40% of the entry fee and possibly the monthly fee, in order to get that, you have to itemize. So you may or may not itemize your tax returns for deductions, but that would be necessary in order to get this. But it's really just a medical expense tax deduction, whereby, again, I won't get into all of this, but if you understand how the medical expense tax deduction works, you would just add this additional expense to that formula to see if you would qualify. So you want to talk to your tax professional about that. But, if nothing else, what you might find is that the year you move in, you may find that it makes sense to itemize at least in that 1 year, because the sizable deduction on the entry fee might put you over the threshold where it makes sense to do that, at least in that 1 year. But that's not tax advice. I have no idea what your situation is. You need to talk with your advisor and your tax professionals about that. So when you think about the cost, what's it cost to live in a retirement community? People ask a lot about comparing the cost of living in a retirement community, staying at home. Well, there's a few things I'd mention. The first one, if we look at this first bullet point, sometimes I've found that people look at the monthly cost of a retirement community, and whatever that may be. It can be $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 or more, just depending on the size of the residence and the community itself and a number of things, but what's included and so forth. But what I've found people will do is they'll look at what they spend a day, whatever you spend. I don't know what your monthly budget is, but whatever it is. And then they look at the monthly service fee to live in that community. They add that. So let's just say I'm just going to say $4,000, just to use a number. $4,000 a month. And now it's like the question is, well, I can't add another $4,000 a month to my budget. But what I tell people is that a lot of what you get within that $4,000 are things you're already paying for. So you're not adding $4,000 to your expenses. You're really looking at the increase is really just the difference between what you're paying and that monthly service fee, plus some extra things that monthly service fee doesn't cover. But you're really looking at the difference between those things. So many people, when they really break that down, find that the difference isn't nearly as much as what they thought. So that's the first thing. Second, you do have to factor in the cost of care. Remember, I showed you a moment ago, some communities, at some retirement communities, you pay the full cost of care. Others, you may pay a discounted cost of care. So these things have to be factored in, really looking at more of a lifetime cost and not just a cost today. And then finally, you have to also consider if that entry fee is refundable. If you have a contract where your entry fee is refundable and your monthly cost doesn't go up if you ever need care, well, that can get pretty competitive pretty quickly, compared to, say, a rental community or even staying in your home. But there's so many variables involved, it's hard to know. We would obviously, if we could predict the future, it would all be a lot easier. If we knew how long we were going to live, how much care we were going to need, and how long we were going to need it. We don't know those things. But the point I want to drive home is just understanding all these variables and trade-offs and thinking in terms of lifetime cost and not just the first, the cost today. So in the last few minutes before I wrap up, I want to talk about choosing the right community. How do you choose the right community? Well, I'm just going to cover very quickly some of the key aspects of the decision process. First is kind of the sort of the fun part, choosing the home, where you're going to live. I mean, after all, this is where you're going to live. So the floor plan, the view, the community itself, the culture, the residents, all of those things are certainly a very important part of this decision process, the amenities and the services and so forth. So that's kind of the obvious part. But beyond that, you need to understand the contract. I've talked a little bit about how pricing works and some details around contracts there, but you need to understand the contract and make sure any questions that you have get answered adequately. The quality of care is important. One of the main reasons people move to a life plan community like Royal Oaks is, well, you know, I'd say there's two reasons. Number one, for what it offers today, but also to know that if something changes later, you have a plan in place. So you have that care available if you should need it. But that means you want to know that it's good quality care. So you want to do your research on that. If it's Medicare certified, which many are, then there's going to be a rating, a CMS, Centers for Medicare Services rating that they apply. You can look at that. You can observe. You can talk. Maybe you know others that have had family members there. The local ombudsman program might have some information. So that you just want to do your due diligence on the care. The management team, the financial management of the community. These things go together, obviously, but they're both very, very important. You know, what's the track record? How long has the community been around? Who manages the community? What's their track record? Greystone, of course, Tim's going to be speaking with you in a moment. And so they have a lot of experience in managing communities like Royal Oaks. But then even locally, you know, the board, how involved are residents in the decision-making process? What's the relationship between management and the residents and that culture? All of those things are very important to the long-term well-being of the community. Your personal finances, is it a good fit for you financially? This is something you have to talk with your own advisor about, talk with the staff. They'll do, again, that financial analysis on the front end. So both parties will be concerned with that. No, it's not just one way. So that'll help some, but obviously that's a big piece of the decision. And then lastly, and really I would say almost one of the most important things, is what I call lifestyle and wellness. I touched on this earlier, those different components of wellness, but really how well the community does wellness, I guess you might say, how well they optimize all those different aspects of wellness. And even right now, with everything going on with coronavirus and all the restrictions, you know, obviously that's made it difficult to do what normally might be done. But I have been blown away at how creative and resilient residents and staff have been through all of this to find ways to continue to really just grow and support that community, that sense of community and the wellness and the social aspects that go into that. It's been pretty impressive to me overall. We don't hear enough about that in the news, but residents and staff have found some really neat ways to maintain, you know, just the overall culture and these different components of wellness, whether it's video classes or doing things outdoors or whatever it may be. I want to end with this last one. You know, people are saying, are people going to be better off at home now and so forth? And, you know, I think always there's been the debate of whether people are better off staying in their home. A lot of people say they want to stay in their home for a number of reasons, which I can understand. But, you know, there's a flip side. I mean, for me, one of the things about staying in your own home is just the unpredictability of that. You just, all the unknowns, whether we're talking about your home and the maintenance and things that can happen there, taking care of the home and the yard maintenance or those kind of things, whether you might need to, you know, modify your home. Maybe those are small modifications. Maybe they need to be extensive. You know, a lot of times people, if they have, particularly unexpectedly, some health event, a heart attack, a stroke, a fall, then the conversation, can we go back home? You know, is the home suitable? And that's not the time to be having that discussion. And it's even things like height of the cabinets, width of the hallways and doorways, the floors, all kinds of things, bathrooms. And so what can happen is, you know, there's just all these unknowns, particularly if you ever needed care. That goes back to that concern about being a burden on family members and, you know, whether you'd have to bring care into your home. And even if your family does help, you still almost always, people need to hire help in addition to that. And it's just, it can be very difficult. Somebody's got to manage all of that. So a lot of that's removed in a retirement community, which is one of the reasons I think people like retirement communities. I am not saying that one's better than the other. Don't get me wrong. I just try to help people think about the things that maybe they don't always think about. Another thing is, if you are in your own home and you did have to move later on, what happens is that's not something you're doing voluntarily or because you want to or have chosen to, but it feels more forced, either by your health condition or by your family. And that's just a difficult situation for everyone. So some people try to stay in their home. They feel like that's where they're independent. In reality, it might be a much less independent situation for some. And then lastly, I think with everything going on now, yes, some will say, well, I want to stay in my home and so forth. But I think particularly if people need care, I guess a couple of things. I've heard from a number of people who've said they've just been really lonely during all of this in their own home. So that ties into the community around you and so forth. So that's not true of everybody, but some. And they've worried about what would happen if my health changed right now with all of this. But also, I think particularly if care is needed, I think aging in place, if you will, is difficult to begin with for a number of reasons. It's often easier in theory than in practice, I think. But all of those challenges are magnified right now. People in and out of your home, your family in and out of your home, what they've been exposed to, somebody trying to oversee this process in the midst of everything happening right now. Those are things that are actually quite difficult. I hear this, I read a lot of articles about this. And so I think people really need to consider that as well. So just a lot of trade-offs here. In a retirement community, a lot of times you can receive that care in your own apartment and things like that by staff and so forth without having to go necessarily into, say, the nursing home and those kind of things. So just a lot of trade-offs to consider that I'm sure the staff can talk with you more about. So with that, I want to first, before we go to questions, just thank you all. Really appreciate your time, and I hope you've learned something that can be helpful for you as you go forward from here. So Chuck, I guess you and Tim, if you guys want to join again, and we'll talk about any questions that you've received.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, please use the chat feature at the bottom. We'll see it on our panel and we'll be able to ask it. While we're waiting for someone to come in, Brad, I did have a question. What do you see? Because I have a lot of people that talk to me about, well, I want to stay in my home because I'm worried about COVID being at Royal Oaks or a Life Plan community. And I feel like I'm safe at my home. What are the trade-offs that you see on that?
Well, it's hard for me to speak really at a granular, say, medical or scientific level about that. I don't have a lot of statistics on that. I don't know if there are a lot of statistics on risk for those in their home versus a retirement community and those kind of things. But what I would say is that when I think about the impact of COVID on senior living, I think about two things. I think first, what I would call care settings, meaning nursing care, assisted living, long-term care, and then I think independent living. And for me, those two things are quite different because by and large, many of the outbreaks, the things that you hear about on the news, which have been tragic, no doubt, but many of those have been in what I would call standalone nursing homes where maybe they weren't run very well to begin with. That wasn't always the case. Don't get me wrong. This has been a tough battle to fight, even for providers that did a lot of the right things. But many of them were at these standalone type nursing homes. And, and so you had that type of a situation, whereas other situations, Royal Oaks, many, many others that I've talked to, where they had zero or very few cases. Now, has it been easy? They've had the restrictions and these things, certainly. But those things for independent living residents has been a lot easier. Because independent living residents within that community can still do certain things. Now, they can't be as close socially and everything as before, but still there's familiar faces. They can go out and walk around the campus or walking trails or outdoor exercise classes, but they're in it together with a community. And for many people, that's important right now. They want to know that they're in this together with like-minded people. They're in it together. There's that sense of community that for some in their own home, they may not be getting that right now. And that has an effect on our health too. So that to me is the big thing there.
We've got, I was going to tell people that we do have recording going on right now. We'll get that posted. They also, I had a question of, are the slides, your slides going to be available on your website, Brad? And maybe talk about what your website is.
Well, the slides won't be available on our website. This presentation won't be available on our website. But again, it sounds like you all will have a recording of this, so that link will be shared with you. And I'm happy to provide the slides to Chuck, and he can get those to you as well. However, we do have a lot of information on our website that covers much of what I've talked with you about today. So we have a resource library, we have a blog that you can visit with a lot of information, again, on kind of what I've touched on here today. So I would encourage you to check that out. I don't even have the website here. You can tell I'm not the best marketer in the world, but mylifesite.net, the site is S-I-T-E. Make sure you have .net instead of .com, and you can check that out and get some really good information, particularly on our blog.
Don't have any other questions right now. Tim, did you have anything you wanted to ask Brad? Maybe that.
No, you did a beautiful job. I actually don't have to do anything. So thanks, Brad. You just made my whole presentation about a minute and a half. So
okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to steal any thunder there.
No,
but
you didn't.
But I'm glad you enjoyed it. So if that's I guess if that's all for my part, then I will say goodbye. But thank you all so much again for joining, and thank you, Chuck and Tim, for having me. I really enjoyed being a part of this and doing this today.
It was nice to have you, Brad.
That website once again for you, Brad. What's your website again?
L-I-F-E site, S-I-T-E, mylifesite.net.
Yeah, and it's very good. I've been out there when I first got into the industry. There's a lot of information there for people that really, it's well organized. I really liked it. So.
Good. Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
All right. If anybody has any other questions,
have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, Brad. If anybody had any other questions, send them in. We'll get them to Brad and get them answered for you.
Absolutely.
Good luck.
All right. Goodbye.
Thanks. All right. We're going to turn it over to Tim. Tim.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully I can get that to work. Everybody see that okay?
Yep. That is up.
Okay. So as I mentioned, I'm going to take my gerontology hat off after being in the business for as long as I have and working with people even in another industry that are of the same age, healthcare related. I think Brad did a beautiful job of just kind of outlining some of the key things that you should be thinking about as you move forward. I do want to say just this before I get going, and I'm going to really kind of focus on the development that Royal Oaks is creating here called Inspirata Pointe, and that is to say the staff, Carrie and Chuck at Inspirata Pointe's marketing office there are very, very seasoned, and they have the ability, I think, to handle those thoughts and questions that Brad alluded to called the biggest concerns about living a long life. And that's really kind of what they go through every single time when they're talking with people. And so it's always, focused on financial. We understand that, but there's other things that come into play that we know that they can answer the questions on, and how Inspirata Pointe could help alleviate those fears, because we're all living in these situations where we wring our hands at times about some of these items. And I think this is, as a gerontologist, this is the type of organization you want to consider to be involved with that can handle all the different options that you may need to have in front of you. So with that, I'm going to click out of the picture here, if I can try to do that, and talk to you a little bit about Inspirata Pointe and put my development hat on so that you understand how is it that a life plan community comes to life, and what are the steps that we're involved with currently that you may want to consider. And then again, hopefully that you'll like to come in and learn more about Inspirata Pointe and how it can help you. So the community itself of Royal Oaks has got this development on the west end of its campus. And we are developing here 156 total units that include apartment homes, 1 and 2 bedroom styles. And then right in the foreground there are villas, or about 20 of those, 2 bedroom styles. And so this is the project of Inspirata Pointe. And quite truthfully, it integrates beautifully with Royal Oaks. It's bringing amenities and options for living that don't exist on the campus today. And so between the synergy of the campus, it's really going to be a wonderful addition that you may want to consider looking at. It is being brought to you by Royal Oaks. I'll just briefly say Royal Oaks has done an outstanding job in creating a community here for the almost 40 years now. They are rock solid financially. They have unbelievable leadership who have essentially been here practically from the beginning. They have had steady growth. You know, they've had times where they've added to their community or have upgraded their community. This is a community that knows what's going on. And ultimately, this new development called Inspirata Pointe is just one of their long-term planning thoughts of making their community as great as it can be and servicing the community as best it can. Quick little picture of this, and I've got a little walkthrough actually, or fly around if I can get it to work here. See if we can do it. Maybe we won't. Oop, here it comes. Hang in there, guys. It's all technology. This is a nice little fly around of Inspirata Pointe. So take a look at this. Uh-oh. I may have clicked myself out.
Did you lose your slides, Tim?
I did. Hold on. I think I got it back now. There we go.
Okay. There we
I'm
go.
back. I'm back amongst the technology gifted here. Okay. So let me talk a little bit about development, and I just want to touch it very briefly, just so you understand how these big projects like this come out of the ground. I can tell you that the planning and effort into any of the large projects like this are between a 5 and 10-year process. And so it's not as though we just figured out we'd want to build something and then tomorrow we've got this to share with you. It takes quite a while to get these big projects off the ground. Having said that, we've got a real development mentality here. And so I want to say, before we even get to that, I want to get to the next slide to say that Inspirata Pointe now, Inspirata Pointe is very pet friendly. So I would expect that if you've got one of the beautiful four-legged family members, that you might want to talk to our staff about how it is that we incorporate those beautiful four-legged family members. So let me now talk about the actual details of the development. The project is very large. It takes a lot of planning, as I mentioned, and just like a developer might approach you to build a house in a development somewhere, if you've had that experience, the people in a development who ultimately choose to get aboard early get the best financial deal. And they get the best deal, meaning what they can choose from relative to the apartment homes or the villas styles that they may have an interest in. If you're the last one in, chances are you're not going to get that selection. You're not going to get the greatest deal. So we follow that mentality. And today we are still in what is called the charter member phase. So this phase involves people getting the best financial deal, best savings on entrance fees, other types of benefits that are built in for you that are very important to have at the initial stages of a development like this. And we are going to be ending that phase just as we had planned to ultimately go into the next phase, which will have a lesser valued package of savings for you. So we're suggesting that even if you have the smallest of inkling that this might be a project you'd be interested in and a place to live, that you contact the office here and get involved with Carrie and Chuck and go through the routines of the questions that you have and details and take care of those so that if in the event you say, you know, this makes sense to me, that we give you the best possible financial savings we can do. The pre-construction phase will be in January of 2021. We are this close, an inch away from constructing, and that's very important for this factor. All the people that we've had involved with our project thus far who have become reservation depositors have done so just on the video that you've just seen and talking with the staff. When things start happening on the site, we're going to be talking with a whole group of people who are waited to see whether or not it actually happens. What does that all mean to you in the long run? This is what it means. In all the years that I've been doing this type of work, and including those with Greystone, this is exactly what's going to happen. We're going to be 100% occupied when the doors come flying open. And so that would mean that if you waited, not only don't you get the best financial deal, you may not get in at all. And you say, well, I'll wait a year, you'll have a 2-bedroom. No, it doesn't quite work that way because everybody who's on the campus will have first priority at anything else that becomes available on campus. So the chances of getting to the community in those first few years of opening, probably very, very low. So we would rather have you at this stage be part of our deposit group and say no later than for us to have to wait to tell you, I'm sorry you waited too late. So here's how it works. Try to schedule an appointment if you'd like by the end of the year. We're going to talk to you about what's involved with actually becoming a depositor like the group that we have today. Here's the thing. The deposit that you have, we call it a reservation deposit. Everybody's put it down. It's completely refundable except a small $300 fee. And so ultimately you're getting nearly everything back. It's earning interest in an account that's an escrow account under your name. And so those dollars are not used for construction, not used for building, not used for anything except for holding for the project as we move forward. So if in the event you said to us, you know, Tim, I'm not coming, I'm moving to Omaha. Great, here's your refund, plus the interest it's earned, minus the 300, okay? But if you said to me, when the doors come flying open, I'd sure like to have that 2-bedroom something, we aren't gonna have it. I've seen it 100% of the time. And so I would rather have you aboard saying, no, I'm not coming, and have something like you'd like, than for you to be on the outside looking in. Here's the key thing about where we are in timing. It's not here yet. We are 2 years roughly away. Maybe that's a little long, actually. But ultimately, this time frame we're in, you have what is known as guaranteed occupancy. So if in the event between now or the time you become a depositor with us and the time those doors are open and ready for you, something goes on, you're going to have a place to go. Okay, so we have all of those details for you to talk to you about if you come in. You will have a place to go. Whereas other life plan communities of our design will say to you, what? You waited too late. I'm sorry, we can't help you. So in this interim period, we've got you covered in the event things change in life. And then, of course, you're going to be a part of an exclusive club. You're going to be the first group of people who ultimately become residents of Inspirata Pointe. And so with that, we've got all kinds of events that we have scheduled moving forward. And for those eventually, once we're open, and you will be of your own kind of exclusive group of people, if you will. Okay. So that is my development hat for you. I strongly urge you. There's no reason why not to take another hour, maybe an hour and a half, and talk through the details. You can't get the information from the website. You can't get it from any website. You got to really talk to somebody, and we encourage you to do that because it's really just your investment of time. And then ultimately, we know that once you see the bigger picture, Inspirata Pointe will be clearer and a part of your potential future. So with that, I'll yield back to any questions maybe, or ultimately to Chuck.
Yeah, if anybody's got any questions, just hit the chat feature and ask your question. Not sure if we're going to get any or not. Okay, I've got one. What expenses are included in the monthly fee at Inspirata, such as gas, electric, phone, TV, etc.?
Yes, good question. And so the staff will have this, but I can answer it too, is very general. Everything that you have in your house generally is enveloped into what the monthly fee includes, including food. So you've got the same type of expenses as Brad was referring to. There might be an incremental thing going on here, but you've got the same expenses you're incurring in your house. It just transfers to us and it's in the form of a monthly service fee. So all those services you just detailed, utilities, whether or not you have access to higher levels of service, meaning care managers and all that, there's a fee for that. But ultimately you have your TV and your cable, and all of these things are packaged, if you will. And so the staff can go into greater detail about all of that.
Yeah, I think really what we tell people is, everything that's you're paying for now, all your maintenance, landscape costs, anything that happens, with the exception of a landline phone. So TV, internet is covered, all of your utilities. Like Tim said, it's pretty much anything you've got in your home other than a landline phone right now. Let's see. I've got one. When and where can actual blueprints be seen?
Well, the staff actually have floor plans, and we are in the process, if not already have received the gridded, as we call it, floor plans. So those are scaled, and it has all the electric and the data and the phones and all that stuff in there. The actual construction drawings, we haven't seen those yet, but we probably here in the next month, maybe, as we get closer to construction, we should be able to grab those construction plans and take a look at things, but we haven't seen them yet.
Let's see, it's like, what about storage in parking area or hall areas?
I will say that the parking is covered parking except the villas. I'm sorry, it's underground parking except the villas, which has their own garage. Storage, of course, is in the building if you're in an apartment home.
Right. We do not, as far as we know, there is no storage in the underground parking structure for apartments. It is on each floor, will be resident storage for additional items. It's not going to be a large storage facility, but let's see, it says extra on that one. So
You probably get your golf clubs in the storage bin that's in the buildings. Yeah, that shouldn't be a problem.
Yep. And they are still working on a lot of that. I mean, it was really just, as Tim can tell you, the amount of work that went into getting the floor plans ready, all of these other things. Now you're starting to see it. They're getting down into the minute details. What are the facilities going to look like? What is housekeeping, closets going to look like? How are they going to be set up?
Right.
All those things. We've got one that says, how many units have been sold?
Well, we've got about 73 that were sold completely. Is that the right number, Chuck? 68 plus the numbers who can't come?
Correct.
Okay, so
Yep.
about 73 or 4. Currently have about 68 with some more coming down the pipe. So we're a little over, we're almost halfway.
Yep.
But we will be under construction. So like I say, the number of inquiries we will see and expect to see are going to start doubling and tripling for us.
And Tim, that kind of goes along to what you said was, some of those that have been sold, something happened and they decided they wanted to come in to Royal Oaks sooner. The life of health event, whatever. So that guaranteed occupancy allowed them to go really right to the head of the line for Royal Oaks.
That's right. So they didn't have to go searching in their time of need. We already took care of them.
All right. Any other questions coming in? Don't see anything right now.
Well, I think, Chuck, you'll follow up with people who have been online here to either answer more questions or provide some more answers to things, or send them things if they need it, or ask them to come on in for a quick chat. That would be the best thing to do.
Yep. And so with that, like I said, if you guys have any more questions,
I think there is hold on, there's a couple here.
Yep.
Wayne's got a question. What would be the deposit amount? Well, it's 10% of the value of the entrance fees. And Chuck, what are the ranges from the smallest to the largest, roughly?
Entrance fee is $255,000 all the way up to, I believe, with a 90% refundable, you're looking close to $700,000.
Yeah, so it's 10% of that, and we've got another program available to you to spread over a period of time. Chuck and Carrie can talk about that with you, but so that you don't have to go into investments that you would take a huge hit on or something like that financially, to be able to spread that out over a period of time to get that 10% provided. And then the entry fee is actually protected. This is another question. It's in escrow. So those dollars, like I mentioned to you, are, and in fact, it's going to be your escrow account with your name on it. So ultimately they're in escrow, and those dollars aren't used for anything other than returning those dollars to you if you needed it.
All right, we did have one other question. How many units have been sold if you take traditional plan and after 1 year you need to move out? Is any money refunded? And on the traditional plan, if you move in, after 5 years, there is nothing left that would go back to the estate upon move out.
So it's an amortized portion over that 5 years.
Correct.
So at least 5 years.
You can go into more detail on that one-on-one.
Yeah. So we have a lot of people on board who are like you. They're looking and taking notes and learning, who would have never thought in a million years they would become a resident of Inspirata Pointe. So I urge you to come in and have a chat with Chuck and Carrie and see how all the pieces can fit together.
And we've also got one from Steve. So monthly costs are 10% of the entrance fee, and that is not necessarily what that is. So there are monthly costs, the monthly expense. We can go over that. It varies by your apartment size, but also if you're a single or a couple, because there's a second person fee on that monthly service fee.
The 10% refers to nothing more than the reservation deposit dollar amount requirement, and that's based on the entrance fee value of the apartment home or villa that you have an interest in. So two separate things, but ultimately two fees. Yeah.
All right. Don't see anything else coming in right now. So I think we're going to go ahead and call it. I want to thank everyone for attending today. We do appreciate it. If you've got any other questions, please reach out to myself or Carrie, and we will be glad to answer it. We'd love to have you come in for an appointment if you haven't already been in. So.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Tim. And thank you for joining. Bye.